Three years ago, Iran saw simmering civil discontent boil over onto the streets, with months of raging protests following the killing of 22-year-old Mahsa Amini by the state's so-called morality police. This week, the Iranian regime's oppression of civilians, and women in particular, has been widely cited by foreign commentators as arguments not only for military intervention, but forced regime change, often without Iranian women present in the discussion. This is MEELive's Spotlight, where we turn our attention to an overlooked part of the story. Today, we look at the societal impact of the airstrikes in Iran and how these momentary but monumental attacks have affected its simmering resistance. Since the 1979 revolution, Iran has been under the rule of the Islamic Republic, whose supreme leaders have imposed a strict theocratic regime. Freedom of expression and peaceful assembly are suppressed. Amnesty International documents widespread arbitrary detention and use of violent interrogation, as well as the systemic discrimination of LGBT+ people and ethnic and religious minorities. Mandatory headscarf laws, morality police crackdowns, and the killing of Mahsa Amini sparked the rise of the Woman Life Freedom movement in 2022, with protests reverberating beyond resistance at home and across Iran's widespread diaspora. But international sanctions have been just as detrimental to stability and prosperity in Iran, protracting poverty and undermining opportunities for young people. Meanwhile, a long history of foreign intervention has typically served Western interests at the cost of civil society. Foreign enemies use civil discontent to justify aggression against Iran's regime, but civilians, especially minorities and dissidents, are often hit hardest by war. These past weeks have seen hundreds killed, thousands wounded, and countless others displaced. As strikes fell from above, did anything shift on the ground in Iran? And have foreign attacks opened a door to the opposition or endangered it? Joining us now is Iranian human rights campaigner Sara Saeed. Sara, welcome to Middle East Eye Live.
Thank you, Mathilda, for having me. It's a pleasure to be here.
We've talked on today's programme about the macro, regional and global impact of the week's violence. What about its impact on the ground? What are people saying or experiencing inside Iran that you're not seeing represented in the global press?
Mathilda, let me just start by saying that the past 12 days, actually the past 12 hours, have been excruciatingly painful. It's been an emotional roller coaster. You and I were bracing for a conversation on the impact of the ongoing war. And yet today we woke up to news of ceasefire, the second one. For many of us, Iranians inside and outside the country, this has felt like a state of collective mental paralysis. I mean, outside, we're glued to our phones, helplessly watching this political charade unfold, hanging on to every update from news channels that we can get, which obviously is reversed at any moment, can get reversed at any moment. We're reposting footage of bombings in streets and neighborhoods that I personally grew up in. It makes me so emotional to even talk about it. And in a lot of ways, we're forced to desensitize ourselves in order to function as citizen journalists, despite total internet blackouts and blackouts and communication shutdowns by the regime. For the past 24 hours, my friends and I've been monitoring IDF, and I mean, more than 24 hours, but we've been monitoring IDF and Mossad channels for evacuation orders to alert civilians. At the same time, we've been digging through social media for intel on whether a strike will hit a certain part of the city so that we can tell people to evacuate. For most part, the strikes, I cannot believe I'm even saying this, but thankfully, for most parts, the missiles have hit military bases and IRGC compounds. And we find ourselves constantly catching our breath, hoping it's not another home, another family, or just an ordinary life. But to answer your question, the impact on the ground has been very painful. And I'm not just talking about their daily lives and livelihoods being disrupted. Despite the many targeted missile strikes on regime compounds and forces, many have lost their loved ones. It's sadly the what war leaves behind. I mean, yesterday I spoke to a friend of mine who was telling me about her friend have to look for the bodies of her loved ones, of her brother and the rest of her family in the midst of rubble. They had to wait for 24 hours and help the search team to swift through. Businesses have been lost, people have been displaced. But I guess what most feels tragic is the blow that feels has been hit, has been delivered to this collective optimism that, against all odds, in the midst of impossible circumstances, felt like the price we had to pay for the fall of this authoritarian regime. And I guess right now there's this this sense of malaise and unpredictability that looms over. And I know it's very temporary. It's very soon to say. The dust hasn't settled. We're just about to, in the next coming days, figure out what's going to happen, how people are going to respond. And I believe, even though there's a lot of destruction left, it could be another chance for a constructive beginning, for an anti-regime movement that has a chance to troubleshoot once again.
I want to dive into that a little bit more. I mean, yeah, you said that it's tragic to think that maybe this violence and indeed these lives lost is a price to pay for the fall of the regime. And I think that's very interesting because it's often used as a justification for foreign intervention. We've seen this used as a justification. Oh, this is a liberation. This is helping the Iranian people to achieve their rights. And a question I have is whether this does pose an opportunity for the opposition in Iran, the resistance in Iran, or whether it could have the adverse effect. I mean, we've seen the Iranian regime crack down, respond to the airstrikes with an internet blackout, as you mentioned. We've seen prisons holding political prisoners, struck. And I wonder if, as the ceasefire is now in place, seemingly, there are fears that the regime, whose vulnerabilities have been exposed, could respond by cracking down on dissidents even more harshly.
That is a possibility. I just want to take you back to the early days of war. I remember in the early days, I was posting about civilian casualties and very, very worried about what's going to unfold. And a friend of mine called me and she said, "Don't question the deaths. Don't feed into the narrative, this victimhood narrative of the regime." And I was surprised. She said, "We're willing to die. If that's what it takes to abolish this regime, we're willing to die." I mean, for many of us, whether we're firmly anti-foreign intervention and horrified by Israeli army's atrocities all around the world, or hunted by a long list of failed regime change experiments in the region, including Iran's own history. I mean, in a lot of ways, Ayatollahs are in power through a chain of events that U.S. put in motion, starting from the overthrow of the democratically elected Mossad. This moment feels like, in a lot of ways, for us, for me specifically, it felt like a moment of making a deal with the devil. I cannot believe I'm saying this, but it felt like our end goals seemed to align. With every targeted strike on the military compounds, on the very buildings. I have this picture of a building on my Instagram, which actually put me on myself on the blacklist. They monitor what's going on social media, and in order to use their weapon of choice, digital authoritarianism, against their own people, in order to suppress dissent and quash any form of dissent online and offline. So for us, every targeted strike felt like we're getting close to that imagined collapse of the theocratic regime that we've spent all our lives resisting. Not because we're naively supporting a foreign assault. No, we're not out there waving flags for a foreign invasion or waiting for a democracy in a box from some Western savior. Please, most of us knew all too well that foreign intervention usually means one of two things. One, that would be a regime 2.0 with better branding, or a bloody internal war that no one asked for. And there are other groups, Mathilda, there are other groups such as the very unpopular Mujahideen, who have, will eventually would want to make a claim, sadly, only because they're organized and they've been supported by the Western power. And bear in mind, civilian casualties were always my personal red line. I've spoken about that on social media. I said very early on, if bombs start falling on people instead of strategic support and precision in the strikes, public opinion will snap. And our hope wasn't war. It was a crack. It was a fracture, just enough for the system to lose its grip so that people could step in, breathe, maybe just be able to recuperate. That was the hope. It's still holding. Sorry.
Is there a sense that without signing this deal with the devil, there is no way to for the resistance, for the uprisings to succeed? We saw in 2022 massive protests hit the streets of Iran demanding more civil rights, liberties for women. These protests persisted for months, but ultimately they subsided with severe, brutality against the activists, and concessions were not really made. Is it true to say that these uprisings, these internal uprisings, did not succeed and maybe could not succeed without foreign intervention, without this deal with the devil?
Mm-hmm, mm-hmm. Before I get on to that, Mathilda, I think it's very important for me to talk about, I guess, where we're at in this juncture, and then sort of take a step back and tell you what I believe has happened throughout the years with the civil unrest and the uprisings that have been constant. The one thing that hasn't changed is that more than 80% of people do not want this authoritarian regime. It's sad that the cost of war is not a one-time bill. It's a subscription to decades of generational trauma, cyclical hatred, and displacement. We didn't want that. So a lot of people tell me, why are you upset with the ceasefire? And it's not that I'm obsessed with it, upset because of the ceasefire. I do believe that we're all sort of looking for a way out, in that we want our own people to take the mantle of their destiny. Now, with a ceasefire that keeps the supreme leader intact and the status quo intact, it feels like a very cruel outcome to this whole entire political enterprise, which is exactly, as you mentioned, reminiscent of what happened during and after the Women, Life, Freedom movement, where uprisings were brutally crushed, and there was this undescribable feeling, this uncertainty that loomed over the future. But it's too soon to predict. And if I can bet on anyone, I will bet on the Iranian people. What I would say to the world and the leaders is that we're relieved the war is over, and thank God, at the end of the day, all wars end, but not all peace begins. And there's a lot of prosperity and peace and congratulations being thrown around by President Trump. But the important thing to know is that in this context, with respect to Iran, peace is not the end of this war. Liberation from the Islamic Republic is. And while Israeli and Iranian officials posture from podiums and bunkers, the youth inherently inherit the debris. And young Iranians who have, as you mentioned already, been stripped off their freedoms, have been conscripted into this war that they didn't declare, and their future feels very hijacked by these old men with power complexes who confuse revenge for strategy. I do not believe that this is the end. I do believe that this is another beginning. As I hear a lot of times about how dissent has been quashed, uprising have been brutally annihilated. Yes, maybe in the sense that people are no longer in the streets, but the remnants of those uprisings have had a tremendous impact on society in terms of how they have rejected the legitimacy and the authority of the regime. I mean, I've spoken about this before, about how hijab wasn't just a cover. It was essentially one of the main pillars of the Islamic regime. So when now we see women standing bravely against the Basijis and the police, saying we're going to take command and autonomy over our own bodies and wear what we want. This is showing a huge fracture in the belief system of the regime, and I believe that to be. I always talk about how since Women, Life, Freedom, we have seen a renaissance, and we cannot go back. Democracy is not a point at which we arrive and the work is done. It's a constant endeavor. It's a process.
But I want to talk about what the next. Sorry to interrupt you. I'm really curious what the next stage of that process looks like. If we're talking about regime change, which of course a lot of people inside and outside Iran have been this last week, then surely we should be talking just as much about what comes after. Reza Pahlavi, the son of Iran's last Shah, one of the leaders of the opposition, he called this the opposition's Berlin Wall moment. What is the state of the opposition in Iran, and is there an alternative leadership ready to step in?
I agree with him. He's one of the most recognized figures in the opposition. I do, however, believe that our Achilles heel in this whole thing has been the disintegrated opposition that we've had. There are many factions, there's many ideologies, schools of thought, people's groups who have somehow not managed to gather around, for me, I would say three main pillars. One being abolishing the Islamic Republic. Second, a secular democracy, and third, a referendum. And for some reason, I've been asking myself for 4 years now. They say the level of your answers will only live up to the level of your questions, and I hope that is. I'm starting to think that is our main problem. In a lot of ways, I believe that. He's right. What he says strikes a chord with a lot of people. In an ideal world, I wish that there was a simpler path forward, one that is less complicated for us to kind of gather behind, whether it be him or another figure. That is, I only have one vote as a citizen, a future citizen of free Iran. I would like to see a coalition. I would like to see the opposition to go beyond a coalition and create a project in which everyone's involved, all diverse voices are heard. No one's labeled. I mean, I was talking to a friend of mine yesterday, and I was like, why are we not opening the way for a lot of people who have, for many years, been called reformists as a label of antagonism because we believe they're with the regime. I was talking to them, and I was saying, why don't we find a way to bridge these and these sort of animosities, bring people who have for a very, very long time in their own way resisted the regime. Maybe it hasn't been enough, and maybe in some instances it has looked like it's been helpful for the regime. But if we want to see a free Iran, we need to absolutely unite behind a parliamentary in transition of sorts, a group, a coalition that everyone's voice is heard, because that's the future we want to see in Iran. That's the government we're yearning to see. and a lot of people tell me that might be too naive. I mean, I always say critical thinking, that's actually not what I say. Maria Popova says critical thinking without hope is cynicism, and hope without critical thinking is naivete. And I try to live in that space in between. So I believe the leadership would eventually come from the ask would come from the people, and our leadership, our opposition should move from a figurehead-based sort of movement to a service-based movement for what's needed and what the people are demanding now.
A new beginning. Sarah Saeed, thank you for joining us on MEE Live.